The screen fades in from black, and we're immediately thrust into a bustling cityscape at night. The camera pans across a busy street filled with people rushing home after a long day of work. Cars honk impatiently, neon signs flicker above storefronts, and the hum of urban life fills the air. But amidst this chaos, something, or rather someone, catches your eye. In the corner of the frame, partially obscured by shadows, sits a woman on a dirty sidewalk. Her clothes are tattered, her hair unkempt, and her face weathered by years of hardship. She clutches an old, worn-out notebook close to her chest, like it's the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Passers-by glance at her briefly before looking away, their expressions ranging from indifference to discomfort. It's clear she's invisible to most, just another statistic in the sprawling metropolis. But then, something extraordinary happens. A sleek black luxury car pulls up to the curb nearby. Its engine purrs softly as it comes to a stop, drawing curious stares from pedestrians. The door opens slowly, almost ceremoniously, and out steps a man who couldn't be more different from the world around him. He's impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. His presence commands attention, not because he demands it, but because he simply exudes power and confidence. This is Jonathan Reed, one of the wealthiest men in the city, if not the world. Now here's the question that should make you lean forward just a little bit more. What could possibly bring a billionaire CEO, a man who has everything, to pause his meticulously scheduled life for someone like her? Think about it. In a world obsessed with appearances, success, and status, why would someone like Jonathan even notice, let alone care, about a homeless woman sitting in the dirt? Before we dive deeper, take a moment to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next, because this isn't just another feel-good story. It's a tale that will challenge everything you think you know about kindness, redemption, and the true meaning of beauty. As the scene unfolds, Jonathan stands there for a moment, his piercing gaze fixed on the woman. You can almost see the gears turning in his mind. Most people would have walked past without a second thought, but not him. There's something in his expression, a mix of curiosity, hesitation, and perhaps even guilt. Whatever it is, it compels him to take a step closer. And that single step sets off a chain reaction that neither of them could have ever anticipated. This story begins not with grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but with a quiet moment of connection in the unlikeliest of places. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this encounter changed both their lives forever, and maybe, just maybe, it'll change yours too. To truly understand why Jonathan Reed, a man who seemingly has everything, would stop for someone society has discarded, we need to peel back the layers of his life, because beneath the polished exterior lies a story far more complex than meets the eye. And trust me, it's a story worth telling. Jonathan wasn't born into privilege, far from it. He grew up in a cramped apartment on the wrong side of town, the son of immigrant parents who worked tirelessly just to keep food on the table. His father was a mechanic, his hands calloused and stained with grease after long days under the hood of cars. His mother cleaned offices at night, often coming home exhausted, but still finding the energy to tuck Jonathan into bed and whisper words of encouragement in his ear. "You're destined for greatness," she'd say, even though their bank account told a different story. From an early age, Jonathan showed signs of brilliance. He devoured books like they were oxygen, teaching himself concepts far beyond his grade level. But brilliance alone doesn't guarantee success, not when you're fighting against systemic barriers and financial limitations. School wasn't easy for him. Kids teased him for wearing hand-me-down clothes and carrying a lunchbox filled with leftovers. Teachers underestimated him because of where he came from. Yet through it all, Jonathan held on to one unshakable belief: he would rise above. And rise he did. After earning scholarships to prestigious universities, Jonathan threw himself into the world of business with relentless determination. He started small, launching a tech company out of his dorm room with nothing but a laptop and a dream. Those early days were grueling. sleepless nights spent coding, countless rejections from investors, and moments of doubt that threatened to derail him entirely. But Jonathan had something most entrepreneurs lack: an unwavering vision. Slowly but surely, his company gained traction, attracting attention from venture capitalists and eventually skyrocketing in value. By the time he turned 35, Jonathan was a billionaire with a sprawling empire that spanned industries and continents. But here's the thing about success: it doesn't come without scars. For every victory Jonathan achieved, there was a sacrifice left in its wake. Somewhere along the way, he lost touch with the people who mattered most, the friends who once cheered him on, the mentors who believed in him, and even parts of himself. Success became both his greatest achievement and his heaviest burden. Beneath the surface, Jonathan carries a deep-seated guilt that few people know about. Years ago, before his meteoric rise, he had a younger sister named Emily. She was the light of their family, kind-hearted, creative, and endlessly supportive of Jonathan's ambitions. But Emily struggled with addiction, a battle that tore her apart, piece by piece. Despite his best efforts, Jonathan couldn't save her. He was too busy chasing his dreams, too focused on building his empire, to be there when she needed him most. When Emily passed away, it shattered something inside him. He buried himself in work, using his achievements as a distraction from the pain. But no amount of money or accolades could fill the void she left behind. That guilt shapes much of who Jonathan is today. On the outside, he's the epitome of confidence and control, a man who commands boardrooms and makes headlines. But on the inside, he's haunted by questions he can't answer. Could I have done more? Was my success worth the cost? These doubts simmer beneath the surface, influencing his decisions in ways even he doesn't fully understand. Which brings us back to that fateful night on the street. Why did Jonathan stop for Clara? Some might say it was random chance, but those who know him, or think they do, would argue otherwise. Beneath his stoic demeanor lies a man desperate to prove that he's not just another wealthy executive disconnected from the real world. He wants to believe that his success means something, that it can be used to make a difference, however small. Perhaps deep down, he sees a reflection of his own failures in Clara's eyes. Or maybe, just maybe, he senses that helping her could be the key to healing wounds he's carried for far too long. Before we move forward, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like Jonathan? Like you're running as fast as you can, yet still falling short somehow? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing to our channel. We share powerful narratives like this one every week, designed to inspire and challenge your perspective. Now let's shift gears and turn our focus to the other half of this equation, Clara Thompson, the woman whose life intersects with Jonathan's in ways neither of them could have predicted. Now that we've peeled back the layers of Jonathan Reed's life, it's time to turn our attention to the woman who sits quietly in the shadows of that bustling city street. Her name is Clara Thompson, though few people call her by it anymore. To most, she's just another faceless figure, a ghost haunting the periphery of their daily lives. But if you take the time to look closer, you'll find that Clara's story is as rich and complex as any novel, filled with heartbreak, resilience, and untapped potential. Clara wasn't always homeless. In fact, there was a time when she was one of the most respected figures in her community. A brilliant educator with a passion for literature, she spent over 2 decades teaching high school English. Her classroom was a sanctuary for students who felt lost or misunderstood. She had a gift for seeing the good in people even when they couldn't see it themselves. Every person has a story worth telling, she'd often say, and every story deserves to be heard. Her lessons weren't confined to textbooks. They were about life. She encouraged her students to think critically, to question the world around them, and to express themselves through writing. Many of her former students credit her with helping them discover their voices. One student once wrote in an essay, "Miss Thompson taught me that words have power, that they can heal wounds, bridge divides, and change the course of someone's life." Little did anyone know how prophetic those words would become. But Clara's own life took a devastating turn. It started with a divorce, a bitter, ugly split that left her financially ruined and emotionally shattered. The man she thought she'd spend her life with turned out to be someone entirely different. Behind closed doors, he drained their savings, leaving her with nothing but debt and a mountain of legal fees. The stress triggered a severe depressive episode, something Clara had struggled with intermittently throughout her life, but never fully confronted. Without a support system to lean on, she spiraled downward quickly. Losing her job was the final blow. After missing too many days due to her declining mental health, the school board terminated her contract. At first, she tried to hold on, bouncing between friends' couches and cheap motel rooms, but eventually pride gave way to desperation, and desperation gave way to survival. Before she knew it, Clara found herself living on the streets, clutching the same notebook she had carried since her teaching days, a relic of a life she could barely remember. Despite everything she's endured, Clara hasn't lost her ability to create beauty from pain. Inside that battered notebook are pages upon pages of poetry, raw, unfiltered expressions of her inner world. Some poems are angry, lashing out at the injustices of the universe. Others are tender, speaking of hope and longing for redemption. Each word is a thread in the tapestry of her soul, woven together with painstaking care. Writing became her lifeline, a way to process the chaos swirling inside her. Yet no one knows these poems exist. Not even Clara herself realizes their true value yet. What makes Clara's situation even more poignant is the way society treats her now. People avoid eye contact when they pass her on the street, as if looking directly at her might force them to confront their own privilege or guilt. Strangers mutter under their breath about how someone like her should pull herself up by her bootstraps, oblivious to the fact that she's already fought harder than most will ever have to. Even her appearance, her matted hair, dirt-streaked skin, and mismatched clothes becomes a barrier, reinforcing stereotypes and judgments that reduce her humanity to a single label, homeless. Yet beneath all the grime and despair lies a woman of extraordinary depth. Clara possesses a quiet dignity that refuses to be extinguished, no matter how dire her circumstances become. There's a fire within her, flickering faintly but stubbornly refusing to go out. And while she may not realize it yet, that fire holds the power to transform not only her own life, but also the lives of those around her, including Jonathan Reed. As we transition into the next part of this story, let's pause for a moment to reflect. How many times have you walked past someone like Clara without giving them a second thought? What stories might they be carrying that you'll never hear unless you stop to listen? If this narrative has sparked something in you, if it's made you reconsider the way you view others, please consider subscribing to our channel. We're committed to sharing stories that challenge perceptions and inspire empathy, and your support helps us continue doing just that. Now, let's move forward to the pivotal moment when Clara and Jonathan's paths finally cross. Their first encounter is about to set off a chain reaction neither of them could have anticipated, and it all begins with a simple conversation. The moment Jonathan approaches Clara, the air seems to shift. It's as if the noise of the city fades into the background, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of quiet intensity. For a man accustomed to commanding rooms filled with powerful executives, Jonathan suddenly feels unsure of himself, a rare sensation that catches him off guard. He clears his throat, the sound breaking the silence like a stone skipping across still water. "Hi," he says softly, his voice steady but tinged with hesitation. "Do you mind if I sit here?" Clara doesn't respond immediately. She looks up at him, her eyes wary and guarded, as though she's trying to decipher whether this stranger poses a threat or an opportunity. After what feels like an eternity, she nods slightly, shifting her body just enough to create space on the cold concrete beside her. Jonathan lowers himself cautiously, careful not to wrinkle his expensive suit, though he barely notices the discomfort. His focus is entirely on the woman in front of him. For a while, neither of them speaks. The silence stretches out, heavy with unspoken questions and assumptions. Clara clutches her notebook tighter, almost protectively, as if it's a shield against intrusion. Jonathan, sensing her unease, decides to break the ice. "I couldn't help but notice you sitting here," he begins, choosing his words carefully. "You seemed different from everyone else." Clara raises an eyebrow, her expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Different how?" she asks, her voice raspy from disuse but laced with sharp intelligence. Jonathan hesitates, unsure of how much to reveal. "I don't know," he admits. "Maybe it's the way you're holding that notebook, like it means something important." Her grip tightens reflexively, and for a moment Jonathan wonders if he's crossed a line. But then Clara lets out a soft chuckle, surprising him. "Most people don't even look at me long enough to notice I'm holding anything," she says dryly. "So yeah, maybe I am different." There's a bitterness in her tone, but also a flicker of amusement, a glimpse of the wit and humor that once made her such a beloved teacher. Jonathan smiles faintly, encouraged by her response. "Well, I'm glad I stopped," he replies, "because now I'm curious. What's in the notebook?" Clara studies him closely, searching for signs of mockery or pity. When she finds none, she relaxes slightly, though her defenses remain firmly in place. "It's nothing special," she says dismissively. "Just some scribbles, things I write when I can't sleep." "Scribbles?" Jonathan repeats, leaning forward slightly. "That sounds intriguing. Do you mind if I ask what kind of things you write?" She shrugs, feigning nonchalance, but there's a glimmer of pride in her eyes that doesn't escape Jonathan's notice. Poems, mostly. Fragments of thoughts. Stuff nobody cares about. Jonathan tilts his head, genuinely interested. "I'd care," he says simply. "If you're willing to share, that is." Clara hesitates, torn between the instinct to protect, her vulnerability, and the unexpected desire to connect with this stranger who seems genuinely interested in her. Finally, she opens the notebook to a random page and hands it to him without meeting his gaze. "Don't expect Shakespeare," she mutters. As Jonathan reads the poem silently, his expression shifts from curiosity to awe. The words are raw and hauntingly beautiful, capturing emotions so vivid they feel almost tangible. One line stands out to him. "Even shadows dream of light." He reads it again, letting the weight of the phrase sink in. "This is incredible," he says finally, looking up at her. "You have real talent, Clara." She blinks, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. "You remembered my name," she says quietly, more to herself than to him. "Of course I did," Jonathan replies. "Why wouldn't I?" For the first time since they met, Clara allows herself to truly look at him, not as a wealthy CEO or a potential threat, but as a person. There's something in his eyes that resonates with her, a shared understanding of pain and longing that transcends their vastly different circumstances. In that moment, a fragile bond begins to form between them. Their conversation continues, weaving through topics both mundane and profound. Clara shares fragments of her story, her career as a teacher, the divorce that shattered her life, and the depression that followed. Jonathan listens intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering no judgment. In turn, he opens up about his own struggles, revealing glimpses of the guilt and emptiness he's carried for years. By the time they part ways that night, both of them feel a sense of connection they hadn't experienced in a long time. For Clara, it's the first time in years someone has seen her as more than just a homeless woman. For Jonathan, it's a reminder of why he started chasing success in the first place, to make a difference, however small. Before we move on to the next chapter, take a moment to reflect on the power of human connection. How often do we miss opportunities to truly see and be seen by others? If this story has touched you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together, we can continue sharing narratives that remind us of our shared humanity. Now, let's explore what happens next as Jonathan begins to unravel the deeper layers of Clara's life and discovers a secret that will change everything. The encounter between Clara and Jonathan doesn't end when they part ways that night. In fact, it's only the beginning of a journey neither of them could have anticipated. For Jonathan, the brief glimpse into Clara's notebook leaves an indelible mark, a spark of curiosity that refuses to fade. He can't stop thinking about the poem she shared, the one with the line, "Even shadows dream of light." Those words linger in his mind like an unanswered question, haunting him in quiet moments. The Next morning, as he sits in his penthouse office overlooking the city skyline, Jonathan finds himself distracted. Spreadsheets and quarterly reports blur together on his computer screen, but his thoughts keep drifting back to Clara. There's something about her writing that resonates deeply with him, something raw and unfiltered that cuts through the noise of his carefully curated life. It reminds him of why he fell in love with storytelling as a child, devouring books late into the night while dreaming of a better future. But it's not just the beauty of her words that captivates him. It's what they reveal about her. Through her poetry, Clara bears her soul in a way most people never dare to. She writes about loss and longing, about the weight of invisibility and the stubborn hope that clings to the edges of despair. Her voice is achingly human, yet profoundly universal, a reminder that pain, no matter how isolating it may feel, connects us all. Jonathan realizes he needs to know more. He decides to visit Clara again, this time bringing coffee and pastries from a nearby cafe. When he arrives at the spot where they first met, he feels a pang of relief upon seeing her still there. She looks up at him warily, clearly surprised. By his return, "I brought you something," he says, holding out the bag. "And I wanted to talk more about your writing." Clara eyes him suspiciously, as if trying to gauge whether his interest is genuine or merely a fleeting act of charity. After a moment, she accepts the food but remains guarded. "You don't strike me as someone who spends much time thinking about poetry," she says pointedly. "You'd be surprised," Jonathan replies with a small smile. "I used to read a lot when I was younger. Books were my escape, but somewhere along the way, I stopped making time for them. Meeting you reminded me of how powerful words can be." His honesty disarms her slightly, though she's still cautious. "What do you want from me, Mr. Reed?" she asks bluntly. "Because I'm not looking for handouts or pity." "It's not pity," he assures her quickly. "It's admiration. Your work. It moved me in a way I wasn't expecting. I think other people should see it, too." Clara scoffs, shaking her head. "Nobody cares about poems written by a homeless woman. Trust me, I've tried." Jonathan leans forward, his tone earnest. "Then let me prove you wrong. Let me help you share your voice with the world. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because the world needs to hear what you have to say." For a moment, Clara is silent, her emotions warring within her. On one hand, the idea of sharing her poetry feels terrifying, like exposing her deepest vulnerabilities to a judgmental audience. On the other hand, there's a flicker of hope buried beneath years of rejection and self-doubt. Could someone like Jonathan actually believe in her enough to make a difference? Eventually, she nods hesitantly. "Fine," she says, "but don't expect miracles." Over the following weeks, Jonathan becomes a regular presence in Clara's life. He visits her often, bringing food, clothing, and occasionally books he thinks she might enjoy. Their conversations grow deeper, revealing new layers of each other's personalities. Clara learns about Jonathan's struggles, the guilt he carries over his sister Emily, the emptiness that success hasn't been able to fill. In turn, she shares more of her own story, including the joy she once found in teaching and the devastation of losing everything she held dear. During these visits, Jonathan encourages Clara to write more, offering gentle feedback and suggestions without overstepping. He buys her a fresh notebook and pens, insisting that her talent deserves proper tools. Slowly but surely, Clara begins to open up, not just to Jonathan, but to herself. Writing becomes less of a coping mechanism and more of a form of self-expression, a way to reclaim pieces of her identity that she thought were lost forever. One day, Jonathan suggests taking some of her poems to a local publisher. "They're good enough to be published," he tells her confidently. "People need to read them." Clara laughs bitterly. "Publishers don't care about stories like mine. They want bestsellers, not broken dreams." "Maybe so," Jonathan admits. "But sometimes broken dreams are exactly what people need to hear. Besides, I happen to know a few editors who owe me favors." Despite her skepticism, Clara agrees to let him try. Together, they compile a selection of her best work, editing and refining it until it shines. The process is painstaking but rewarding, giving Clara a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she allows herself to imagine a future beyond the streets, a future where her voice matters. As Jonathan works behind the scenes to secure a publishing deal, he begins to notice changes in himself as well. Helping Clara reignites a passion he thought he'd lost, a desire to use his resources for something greater than profit margins. He starts questioning the values that have guided his career thus far, wondering if success truly means anything without meaning. Before we move on to the next chapter, take a moment to consider the transformative power of art. How many untold stories are waiting to be discovered simply because no one took the time to listen? If this narrative has inspired you to seek out hidden voices in your own life, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every subscription helps us continue telling stories that challenge perspectives and celebrate humanity. Now, let's explore what happens when Clara's secret comes to light, a revelation that will test both her trust in Jonathan and their growing bond. With Clara's poetry now in hand and a tentative agreement to pursue publication, Jonathan shifts his focus to a broader goal, helping her rebuild her life. It's not enough to simply publish her work. He knows that true transformation requires addressing the root causes of her homelessness, the mental health struggles, societal rejection, and lack of resources that have kept her trapped in despair. But Jonathan is nothing if not methodical, and he approaches this challenge with the same precision and determination that built his empire. The first step is ensuring Clara has access to basic necessities. He arranges for her to stay in a transitional housing facility, a clean, safe environment where she can begin the process of healing without the constant threat of danger or exposure. At first, Clara resists the idea, fearing it's too good to be true. "Why are you doing this?" she asks him one evening, her voice tinged with suspicion. "What do you get out of helping me?" Jonathan meets her gaze steadily. "Nothing," he says simply, "except maybe the chance to make things right for both of us." His answer disarms her, though she still harbors doubts. Over time, however, the stability provided by the housing facility begins to chip away at her defenses. For the first time in years, she sleeps through the night without fear of being robbed or assaulted. She has access to hot meals, clean clothes, and even counseling services, resources she never imagined she'd receive again. But Jonathan doesn't stop there. Recognizing that Clara's mental health is central to her recovery, he connects her with a therapist who specializes in trauma and depression. At first, Clara refuses to attend sessions, insisting she doesn't need shrinks poking around in her mind. Yet Jonathan persists, gently encouraging her to give it a try. "You don't have to talk about anything you're not ready for," he tells her. But sometimes just having someone listen can make all the difference. Reluctantly, Clara agrees to meet with the therapist once, then twice, then 3 times. Slowly, she begins to open up, unraveling the tangled threads of grief, guilt, and shame that have weighed her down for so long. Through therapy, she starts to confront the demons that drove her to the streets and discovers a resilience within herself that she thought was lost forever. Meanwhile, Jonathan works tirelessly behind the scenes to secure a publishing deal for Clara's poetry. Leveraging his connections in the literary world, he pitches her manuscript to several editors, framing it not as a charity project, but as a powerful work of art deserving of recognition. To his delight, one editor, a former English professor named Margaret Hensley, is immediately captivated by Clara's words. "This is extraordinary," Margaret says after reading the poems. "It's raw, honest, and utterly compelling. We'd be fools not to publish it." With the deal secured, Jonathan shares the news with Clara during one of their regular meetings. Her reaction is a mixture of disbelief and cautious optimism. "They really want to publish my poems?" she asks, her voice trembling. "Not because of you, but because of me?" "Because of you," Jonathan confirms firmly. "Your talent speaks for itself, Clara. All I did was help amplify your voice." For the first time in years, Clara allows herself to feel a glimmer of pride. The thought of seeing her words in print fills her with a sense of validation she hasn't experienced since her teaching days. Yet alongside the excitement comes fear. Fear of failure, of judgment, of letting herself hope only to be disappointed again. Jonathan senses her hesitation and reassures her every step of the way. We'll take it slow, he promises. One day at a time. You've already come so far. As the weeks pass, Clara begins to embrace the opportunities unfolding before her. With Jonathan's guidance, she enrolls in a community writing workshop where she meets other aspiring authors who share her passion for storytelling. For the first time in years, she feels like part of a community, a group of people who see her not as a homeless woman, but as a fellow creator. Yet, despite these positive developments, challenges arise. Some members of Clara's new housing facility resent what they perceive as special treatment, accusing her of using Jonathan's wealth to skip ahead in line. Others mock her poetry, dismissing it as sad scribbles, unworthy of attention. These criticisms sting, threatening to undermine her fragile confidence. When Clara confides in Jonathan about the backlash, he listens patiently before offering advice. People will always find reasons to doubt you, he says, but their opinions don't define your worth. What matters is how you see yourself and whether you believe in the value of your own story. His words resonate deeply with Clara, reinforcing her resolve to keep moving forward. Still, there are moments when the weight of everything feels overwhelming, and she considers abandoning the plan altogether. During one particularly low point, she tells Jonathan, "Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just go back to the way things were." Jonathan shakes his head firmly. "No, Clara, you've worked too hard to give up now. And besides, the world needs your voice. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." Through sheer determination and mutual support, Clara pushes through the obstacles, inching closer to the life she once thought was beyond reach. Meanwhile, Jonathan continues to reflect on his own journey, realizing that helping Clara has reignited something vital within him, a sense of purpose that transcends wealth and status. Before we move on to the next chapter, take a moment to consider the power of perseverance. How many times have you faced setbacks that made you question whether it was worth continuing? If Clara's story inspires you to keep pushing forward despite the odds, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together, we can celebrate resilience and remind ourselves that no dream is ever truly out of reach. Now, let's explore the turning point in Clara's journey, a confrontation with her inner demons that threatens to derail everything she's worked so hard to achieve. As Clara inches closer to reclaiming pieces of her former self, the weight of her transformation begins to press down on her like a storm cloud threatening to burst. For every step forward, there's a shadow lurking just behind, a whisper of doubt that tells her she doesn't deserve this second chance, that she's fooling herself if she thinks she can escape the life she's known for so long. It's not just external challenges that test her resolve. It's the battle raging within her own mind, a war between hope and despair, courage and fear. One evening, after a particularly grueling therapy session, Clara sits alone in her small room at the transitional housing facility. The walls are bare except for a single poster of a sunset taped above her bed, a gift from one of the staff members meant to inspire positivity. But tonight, even the vibrant colors of the image feel mocking, a cruel reminder of how far she still has to go. Her notebook lies open on the desk in front of her, the pages filled with half-finished poems and crossed-out lines. She stares at them blankly, unable to summon the words that once flowed so freely. Her thoughts spiral downward, feeding on years of accumulated pain. "Who do you think you are?" the voice inside her head sneers. "You're no poet. You're no teacher. You're nothing but a failure who got lucky because some rich guy felt guilty." The accusations sting because they echo truths she's spent years trying to bury. Yes, she failed her students by leaving her job. Yes, she let her marriage crumble without fighting harder. And yes, she allowed depression to drag her into the abyss until she became unrecognizable, even to herself. How could anyone believe in her now when she barely believes in herself? The breaking point comes during a meeting with Margaret Hensley, the editor overseeing her poetry collection. They're reviewing edits for the manuscript, discussing potential titles and cover designs, when Clara suddenly freezes. The enormity of what's happening hits her like a tidal wave. People are going to read these poems, her poems. Strangers will peer into the darkest corners of her soul, judging her not just as a writer but as a person. What if they hate it? What if they laugh? Worse yet, what if they pity her? I can't do this, she blurts out, standing abruptly. I'm sorry, Margaret. I need to go. Before Margaret can respond, Clara rushes out of the office, tears streaming down her face. She doesn't stop running until she reaches the park near the housing facility, where she collapses onto a bench, gasping for air. Her chest feels tight, as though an invisible hand is squeezing the life out of her. She clutches her arms around herself, rocking back and forth as sobs rack her body. Jonathan finds her there hours later, sitting in the same spot under the dim glow of a street lamp. He approaches cautiously, sensing her fragility. "Clara," he calls softly, his voice laced with concern. "Are you okay?" She looks up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "No," she whispers hoarsely. "I'm not okay. I don't belong. Here, Jonathan, I never did. This whole thing, it's a mistake. I should have stayed where I was, where I didn't have to pretend anymore." Jonathan kneels beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Clara, listen to me. You're not pretending. Everything you've done, the writing, the therapy, the workshops, it's all real. It's who you are. Don't let fear take that away from you." "But what if I fail?" she cries, her voice breaking. "What if everyone realizes I'm just a fraud? That I don't deserve any of this?" "You won't fail," he says firmly. "And even if things don't go perfectly, and they rarely do, that doesn't mean you're a fraud. It means you're human, Clara. Your strength isn't in being perfect. It's in getting back up every time you fall. And trust me, I know something about falling." His words strike a chord deep within her. She remembers fragments of their conversations over the past months, how he spoke of his guilt over his sister Emily, of the emptiness that success couldn't fill. In that moment, she sees him not as the untouchable billionaire CEO, but as a flawed, vulnerable man who understands her pain because he carries his own. "Why do you care so much?" she asks quietly, her voice trembling. "Why does my story matter to you?" Jonathan hesitates, searching for the right words. "Because your story reminds me of why I started chasing success in the first place, to make a difference. And because I see parts of myself in you, the parts I've tried to ignore or fix. Helping you helps me too." For the first time, Clara truly understands the depth of Jonathan's commitment, not just to her, but to himself. His belief in her isn't charity. It's a reflection of his own journey toward redemption. Slowly she nods, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. "Okay," she murmurs. "I'll try again, but promise me one thing." "Anything," he says. "If I mess up, if I stumble, you won't give up on me. I promise," he replies without hesitation. "We're in this together, Clara, no matter what." Over the next few days, Clara leans heavily on Jonathan's support, drawing strength from his unwavering faith in her. Together, they revisit the manuscript, refining each poem until it shines. She attends another therapy session, confronting the root causes of her anxiety and learning coping mechanisms to manage her triggers. Bit by bit, she begins to rebuild her confidence, reminding herself that progress isn't linear. It's messy, imperfect, and beautiful in its own way. Yet even as Clara starts to embrace her new reality, a deeper truth looms on the horizon, a revelation that will force both her and Jonathan to confront the full weight of their shared history. Before we move on to that pivotal moment, take a moment to reflect on the power of vulnerability. How often do we allow ourselves to be seen fully, flaws and all? If Clara's journey inspires you to embrace your own imperfections, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every subscription helps us continue sharing stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Now, let's uncover the secret Clara has been carrying, a revelation that will change everything they thought they knew about each other. The days following Clara's breakdown are a delicate balancing act. She continues to push forward, buoyed by Jonathan's unwavering support, but there's still a lingering tension beneath the surface, a sense that something remains unspoken between them. It's not until a quiet evening at the transitional housing facility that the truth finally comes to light, unraveling the threads of their shared past in a way neither of them could have foreseen. It happens during one of their regular meetings. They're sitting side by side at a small table in the common area, reviewing the final edits for Clara's poetry collection. The room is warm and inviting, with soft lighting and the faint hum of conversation from other residents creating a comforting backdrop. Jonathan points out a line in one of the poems, a phrase about resilience and second chances, and remarks on how powerful it feels. That line, he says thoughtfully, it reminds me of someone who used to say something similar, a teacher I had in high school. She always told us that failure isn't the end, it's just another step on the journey. Clara freezes, her pen hovering midair above the page. Her expression shifts subtly, as though she's wrestling with a decision. After a long pause, she sets the pen down and looks at him directly. "What was her name?" she asks quietly. Jonathan frowns, caught off guard by the question. "Her name was Miss Thompson," he replies slowly. "Why?" For a moment, Clara doesn't respond. Instead, she stares at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to confirm something she already knows. Then, with a deep breath, she speaks. "That was me." Jonathan blinks, confusion washing over him. "What do you mean?" "I was Miss Thompson," Clara explains, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside her. "I taught English at Lincoln High School for over 20 years, and if I'm remembering correctly, you were one of my students." The words hit Jonathan like a thunderclap, jolting him back to a time he hasn't thought about in years. Memories flood his mind, images of a bright, passionate teacher who believed in him when no one else did. He remembers her encouraging him to apply for scholarships, staying late after class to help him with essays, and telling him he had the potential to change the world. "Miss Thompson," he whispers, his voice trembling. "It can't be." You're Clara?" She nods, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, and you're Jonathan Reed, the boy who sat in the front row scribbling notes furiously because you wanted so badly to prove yourself. The boy who wrote me letters thanking me for believing in him when he didn't believe in himself." Jonathan is speechless, overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. He had no idea that the woman he'd been helping, the woman whose life he'd become so deeply invested in, was the same person who had once inspired him to chase his dreams. It's as if the universe has come full circle, bringing them together again in a way that defies logic or coincidence. But how, he finally manages to ask. "How did you end up here?" Clara sighs, the pain of her story evident in every word. "Life happened, Jonathan. My marriage fell apart, my mental health deteriorated, and I lost everything, including the career I loved. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to turn back. I became invisible, just another statistic in a city full of broken people." Her admission breaks something open inside him. All the guilt he's carried for years, the guilt over failing his sister Emily, over prioritizing success over humanity, comes rushing to the surface. Here was someone who had once given him so much, only to fall through the cracks of a system he now benefits from. The irony isn't lost on him. "I'm so sorry," he says, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have known. I should have seen you sooner." Clara shakes her head, reaching out to place a hand on his arm. "You couldn't have known, Jonathan. That's not your fault. What matters is that you're here now, that you stopped when no one else did." They sit in silence for a while, the revelation hanging heavy in the air between them. For Jonathan, it's a moment of profound clarity. Helping Clara wasn't just about making amends for his own mistakes. It was about honoring the legacy of the woman who shaped him into the man he is today. And for Clara, it's a chance to reclaim a piece of herself she thought was lost forever, the part of her that mattered, that made a difference. As the initial shock begins to fade, they talk more openly about their shared history. Clara shares stories about teaching Jonathan and other students, recalling moments of triumph and struggle with equal fondness. Jonathan listens intently, marveling at how much she sacrificed to inspire others, even when it cost her dearly. "You saved me once," he tells her earnestly. "Now it's my turn to save you." Clara smiles softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Maybe we're saving each other," she says. "Isn't that how it's supposed to work?" Before we move on to the next chapter, take a moment to reflect on the power of connections, how the smallest acts of kindness can ripple outward, shaping lives in ways we may never fully understand. If this story resonates with you, If it reminds you of the importance of gratitude and reciprocity, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together, we can celebrate the beauty of human relationships and the ways they transform us. Now, let's explore what happens next as Clara's transformation reaches new heights, and Jonathan's efforts to help her inspire a larger movement, one that challenges societal perceptions and creates opportunities for others in need. In the weeks following their revelation, Clara undergoes a metamorphosis that is nothing short of extraordinary. It's not just about external changes, though those are significant, but about the profound shift within her. For the first time in years, she begins to see herself not as a victim of circumstance, but as a survivor, someone who has endured unimaginable hardships and emerged stronger because of them. The publication of her poetry collection becomes a turning point, a moment when the world finally sees Clara Thompson for who she truly is, a brilliant, resilient woman whose words carry the weight of lived experience and unshakable hope. Margaret Hensley, her editor, works tirelessly to ensure the book receives the attention it deserves. They settle on a title that perfectly encapsulates its essence, Even Shadows Dream of Light. The cover design features a simple yet striking image, a single ray of sunlight breaking through storm clouds, symbolizing resilience and renewal. When the book hits shelves, the response is overwhelming. Critics praise Clara's raw honesty and lyrical prose, calling her work a masterpiece of vulnerability and a testament to the human spirit. Readers from all walks of life connect with her poems, finding solace and inspiration in her ability to articulate universal emotions. Social media buzzes with posts from people sharing their favorite lines, many of whom admit they've never read poetry before, but were moved to tears by Clara's words. For Clara, the success of the book feels surreal. She attends readings and signings, standing nervously behind podiums as audiences applaud her courage and talent. At first, she struggles with imposter syndrome, convinced that any moment someone will realize she doesn't belong in this world of literary acclaim. But Jonathan is always there, sitting in the front row, reminding her with his steady gaze that she earned every bit of this recognition. One particularly poignant event takes place at a local library, where Clara reads excerpts from her collection to a packed room. As she speaks, her voice trembles slightly, but her passion shines through. When she finishes, the audience erupts into applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Among them is a young woman who approaches Clara afterward, tears streaming down her face. "Your poems saved me," the woman says, clutching a copy of the book. "I was ready to give up, but reading your words made me realize I'm not alone." "Thank you." Clara hugs her tightly, feeling a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly knocks her off balance. In that moment, she understands the true impact of her work, not just as art, but as a lifeline for others struggling to find meaning in their pain. It's a responsibility she accepts with humility and grace, knowing that her own journey has prepared her for this role. Meanwhile, Jonathan continues to support Clara in practical ways, ensuring she has access to resources that help sustain her newfound independence. He helps her secure a small apartment, a cozy space filled with books, plants, and sunlight, and encourages her to enroll in community college courses to further her education. Though Clara initially hesitates, fearing she's too old to start over, Jonathan reminds her that growth knows no age limit. "You've already proven you can overcome anything," he tells her one evening as they sit together in her new living room. "Why stop now?" Inspired by his belief in her, Clara throws herself into her studies, rediscovering the joy of learning she once shared with her students. Her professors quickly recognize her potential, offering mentorship and opportunities to engage with younger generations. Before long, she is invited to speak at schools and community centers, sharing her story and encouraging others to pursue their dreams despite adversity. Her transformation isn't without challenges, however. There are moments when self-doubt creeps back in, whispering insidious lies about her worthiness. Some critics dismiss her success as a fluke, attributing it to Jonathan's influence rather than her own merit. Others judge her appearance, pointing out that she still doesn't conform to societal standards of beauty or professionalism. But Clara refuses to let these voices define her. With each obstacle, she grows more determined to prove that true value lies beneath the surface, that it's our actions, not our appearances, that matter most. She channels her frustrations into her writing, crafting new poems that challenge stereotypes and celebrate individuality. One piece, titled Ugly Woman, Beautiful Soul, becomes an anthem for marginalized communities, sparking conversations about representation and acceptance. As Clara's influence expands, Jonathan finds himself profoundly affected by her journey. Watching her reclaim her identity inspires him to reevaluate his own priorities. He begins incorporating social impact initiatives into his company's mission, launching programs aimed at addressing homelessness, mental health, and educational inequality. His employees notice the change in him. He's less focused on profits and more invested in creating meaningful change. "I owe it all to Clara," he admits during a board meeting. "She reminded me why I started this journey in the first place, to make a difference. And now, thanks to her, I know exactly where to begin." Their partnership evolves into something deeper, a mutual admiration society built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. While neither of them labels their relationship romantically, there's an undeniable bond between them, forged through vulnerability and perseverance. They become each other's anchors, supporting one another through triumphs and setbacks alike. Before we move on to the next chapter, take a moment to reflect on the power of transformation. How often do we underestimate our capacity for growth, assuming it's too late to start anew? If Clara's story inspires you to embrace change and pursue your passions, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together, we can continue celebrating stories of resilience and reminding ourselves that it's never too late to rewrite our narratives. Now, let's explore how Jonathan's evolution mirrors Clara's, a journey of self-discovery that leads him to redefine success and reconnect with his humanity. As Clara continues to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of her past, Jonathan undergoes a parallel transformation, one that is quieter but no less profound. For years, he had equated success with numbers: revenue growth, market share, stock prices. These metrics defined his worth, shaping not only his career but also his identity. Yet, as he witnesses Clara's resilience and watches her reclaim her place in the world, he begins to question whether these external achievements truly matter, or if they've merely been distractions from what really counts. The turning point comes during a quiet evening at Clara's apartment. They're sitting together on her couch, sipping tea and discussing the upcoming launch of her second poetry collection, a project inspired by the countless letters she's received from readers who found hope in her words. Clara shares her excitement about the book tour, which will take her to cities across the country, allowing her to connect with even more people. Her enthusiasm is infectious, lighting up the room with a warmth that makes Jonathan smile. "No," he says after a moment. "I used to think success was about building something big, something that would outlast me. But watching you, it's made me realize that true success isn't about leaving behind monuments or legacies. It's about touching lives while we're here." Clara tilts her head, studying him thoughtfully. "What brought this on?" she asks gently. He hesitates, choosing his words carefully. "You did. Seeing how your story has impacted others, it's reminded me of why I started chasing success in the first place. Not for fame or fortune, but because I wanted to make a difference. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I got so caught up in the game that I forgot what it was all for." His admission hangs in the air, raw and unfiltered. It's rare for Jonathan to speak so openly about his vulnerabilities, especially to someone outside his inner circle. But with Clara, there's a sense of safety, an understanding that goes beyond words. She listens without judgment, her presence grounding him in a way few people ever have. "I think we all lose sight sometimes," she replies softly. "But the fact that you're recognizing it now, that's what matters. You still have time to redirect your path." Her words resonate deeply with him, planting seeds of change that quickly take root. Over the following weeks, Jonathan begins implementing sweeping reforms within his company, prioritizing social impact over profit margins. He establishes a foundation dedicated to addressing homelessness, mental health, and educational inequality, issues close to his heart thanks to Clara's influence. The foundation partners with local organizations to provide resources and support for underserved communities, ensuring that help reaches those who need it most. One of the foundation's flagship programs focuses on empowering formerly homeless individuals to reintegrate into society. Modeled after Clara's own journey, the program offers housing assistance, counseling services, and vocational training tailored to each participant's unique needs. Jonathan insists on naming it Even Shadows Dream of Light, honoring the title of Clara's debut poetry collection and the philosophy it represents. To lead the initiative, Jonathan recruits a team of passionate advocates, including Clara herself. At first, she hesitates, fearing she lacks the qualifications to contribute meaningfully. But Jonathan reassures her, pointing out that her lived experience makes her uniquely qualified to guide others facing similar challenges. You don't need a degree to inspire people, he tells her. Sometimes the best teachers are those who've walked the same road. With his encouragement, Clara steps into the role, using her voice and story to advocate for systemic change. She speaks at conferences, writes op-eds, and collaborates with policymakers to address the root causes of homelessness. Her advocacy work amplifies the foundation's reach, drawing attention to issues often overlooked by mainstream media. Meanwhile, Jonathan undergoes a personal evolution that mirrors Clara's. He begins practicing mindfulness, setting aside time each day to reflect on his actions and motivations. He reconnects with old friends and mentors, mending relationships strained by years of neglect. Most importantly, he learns to embrace vulnerability, not as a weakness, but as a source of strength. This newfound openness extends to his interactions with employees and colleagues. Gone is the aloof CEO who ruled boardrooms with an iron fist. In his place stands a leader who listens, empathizes, and values collaboration over control. His staff notices the shift immediately, responding with renewed loyalty and dedication. Productivity soars, not because of stricter deadlines or higher stakes, but because everyone feels seen and valued. Jonathan's transformation culminates in a bold decision, stepping down as CEO of his company to focus full-time on philanthropy. It's a move that shocks the business world, sparking debates about whether he's throwing away decades of hard work. But Jonathan knows better. For the first time in his life, he feels aligned with his purpose, a calling that transcends titles and accolades. "I didn't build my empire to hoard power," he explains during a press conference announcing his departure. "I built it to create opportunities, to give back to a world that gave me so much. Now, I'm ready to dedicate myself fully to that mission." The announcement garners widespread praise, with many hailing Jonathan as a visionary leader willing to put humanity above profit. Yet for all the public recognition, the most meaningful validation comes from Clara. When he shares the news with her privately, she simply smiles and says, "You've come a long way, Jonathan Reed. I'm proud of you." Before we move on to the next chapter, take a moment to reflect on the ripple effects of personal growth. How often do we cling to outdated definitions of success, afraid to redefine our paths? If Jonathan's journey inspires you to reconsider your own priorities, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together we can celebrate stories of transformation and remind ourselves that it's never too late to align with our true purpose. Now, let's explore the emotional culmination of Clara and Jonathan's shared journey, their reunion at a pivotal event that celebrates everything they've achieved together. The evening is crisp and clear, the kind of night where the stars seem closer than usual, as if they're watching over the world below with quiet approval. Inside a grand ballroom adorned with twinkling fairy lights and elegant floral arrangements, the air buzzes with anticipation. It's the launch event for Clara's second poetry collection, Even Shadows Dream of Light, A New Dawn, and the room is filled with people whose lives have been touched by her words. Readers, advocates, journalists, and even some of the individuals she's helped through Jonathan's foundation. Clara stands near the podium, adjusting the sleeves of her dress, a simple yet elegant navy blue gown that complements her natural grace. She looks radiant, though there's still a hint of nervousness in her eyes. Despite all she's accomplished, moments like this never fail to remind her of how far she's come and how much she owes to the people who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Jonathan watches her from across the room, his heart swelling with pride. He's dressed impeccably, as always, but tonight there's something different about him, an ease in his demeanor, a lightness that wasn't there before. Over the past months, he's shed layers of pretense and ambition, embracing a simpler, more authentic version of himself. And much of that transformation can be traced back to the woman standing center stage, preparing to share her story with the world once again. As the event begins, the host, a renowned literary critic, takes the microphone to introduce Clara. "Ladies and gentlemen," she says, her voice warm and resonant, "tonight we gather not just to celebrate a book, but to honor a movement, a testament to the power of resilience, compassion, and the human spirit. Please welcome the extraordinary poet and advocate Clara Thompson." The audience erupts into applause as Clara steps up to the podium. She pauses for a moment, taking in the sea of faces before her. Among them, she spots Jonathan sitting near the front, his gaze steady and encouraging. Their eyes meet briefly, and she feels a surge of gratitude so powerful it brings tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she begins, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with each word. "When I first started writing these poems, I never imagined anyone would read them, let alone stand here celebrating them with me. For years, I lived in the shadows, convinced that my voice didn't matter. But then, someone stopped to listen. Someone saw me, not as a homeless woman or a broken soul, but as a person worthy of love and respect." She pauses, glancing toward Jonathan. "That someone is here tonight, and I want to take a moment to thank him. Jonathan Reed, you didn't just save me. You reminded me of who I am. You showed me that even in our darkest moments, there's light waiting to break through. And because of you, I've been able to pass that light on to others." The crowd turns to look at Jonathan, who shifts uncomfortably in his seat, unused to being the center of attention. But when he meets Clara's gaze, he sees only sincerity and affection. He stands slowly, nodding in acknowledgement, and the room erupts into another round of applause. After the reading, guests mingle during a reception featuring live music and hors d'oeuvres. Clara finds Jonathan near the dessert table, examining a tray of miniature eclairs with feigned indecision. She approaches him with a playful smile. "Still struggling to make decisions, I see," he chuckles, turning to face her. "Some things never change," he says. "But seriously, Clara, your speech was incredible. You have a way of making people feel seen. And you have a way of making miracles happen," she replies softly. "I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for everything." "You don't need to thank me," he insists. "If anything, I should thank you. You saved me once, remember? Back when I was just a kid trying to find my place in the world. And now, you've done it again." They share a quiet moment, the weight of their shared history settling between them like a comforting blanket. There's no need for further words. They both understand the depth of what they've given each other, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care and connection. Later, that evening, as the event winds down, Clara and Jonathan step outside onto a balcony overlooking the city skyline. The lights stretch endlessly in every direction, a reminder of the countless lives intertwined within this vast urban tapestry. They lean against the railing side by side, breathing in the cool night air. "You know," Clara says after a while, "I used to hate cities like this, too loud, too crowded, too indifferent. But now, I see beauty in them. In the chaos, there's possibility. In the darkness, there's hope." Jonathan nods thoughtfully. "It's funny how perspectives shift," he muses. "For years, I thought success meant controlling the chaos. Now I realize it's about finding harmony within it." They fall silent, content simply to be in each other's presence. Though their paths may diverge in the future, Clara continuing her advocacy work, Jonathan dedicating himself to philanthropy, they know their bond will endure. They've become more than teacher and student, benefactor and beneficiary. They're partners in a shared mission to illuminate the shadows of the world. Before we conclude this remarkable story, Take a moment to reflect on the beauty of human connection. How often do we underestimate the impact of a single act of kindness, unaware of the ripples it creates? If Clara and Jonathan's journey inspires you to seek out opportunities to make a difference, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together we can continue sharing stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the infinite potential for change. Now, let's bring this story to its final impactful conclusion, a message that will linger in your heart long after the credits roll. As the night deepens and the city hums softly in the background, Clara and Jonathan remain on the balcony, their conversation shifting from personal reflections to broader musings about life, humanity, and the interconnectedness of all things. It's here, under the vast expanse of stars, that they distill the essence of their shared journey into a message, one meant not just for themselves, but for anyone willing to listen. You know, Clara says thoughtfully, her voice carrying a quiet wisdom born of hardship and triumph. People often talk about beauty as if it's something you can see or touch. But real beauty, it's in the moments we choose to care for each other. In the way we lift someone up when they're falling, even if we don't know them. That's what makes us human. Jonathan nods, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the city lights blur into the night sky. And yet, so many of us forget that. We get caught up in appearances, in status, in chasing things that don't really matter. We lose sight of what's right in front of us, the people who need us, the opportunities to make a difference. Clara smiles faintly, her expression tinged with both sadness and hope. It's easy to look away, to tell ourselves it's not our problem. But every time we do, we miss a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves, something meaningful. Her words linger in the air, resonating deeply with Jonathan and, by extension, with anyone witnessing their story. He thinks back to the countless times he walked past people like Clara without a second glance, assuming they were beyond his reach or responsibility. Now he knows better. He understands that true success isn't measured by wealth or accolades, but by the lives we touch and the legacies we leave behind. Do you think people will remember us? He asks after a moment, his tone contemplative, not for what we've done, but for how we've made them feel. Clara tilts her head, considering the question. I think they will, if we keep reminding them of their own worth, if we show them that no matter where they are in life, they have value. That's the kind of legacy that lasts, not monuments or headlines, but the ripple effects of kindness. Their conversation drifts into silence, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirp of crickets hidden somewhere below. They stand there for a while longer, absorbing the magnitude of everything they've experienced together. From the moment Jonathan stepped out of his luxury car and approached Clara on that cold sidewalk, their lives have been irrevocably intertwined, a testament to the power of connection and the transformative potential of seeing beyond surface-level judgments. Eventually, Clara turns to him with a soft smile. You once told me that my story reminded you why you started chasing success in the first place. Do you remember that? He nods, returning her smile. How could I forget? Well, she continues, her voice steady and warm, maybe it's time to chase something else now, something that doesn't end when the money runs out or the applause fades, something that keeps growing even after we're gone. Jonathan exhales slowly, feeling the truth of her words settle into his core. She's right. His journey isn't over. It's just beginning. And this time, he knows exactly where to focus his energy, on creating a world where stories like Clara's aren't anomalies, but examples of what's possible when we dare to care. As the scene fades to black, the narrator's voice emerges, gentle yet powerful, addressing the audience directly. This is more than just a story about a billionaire, CEO, and a homeless woman. It's a reminder that beneath the labels we assign each other, rich or poor, successful or struggling, beautiful or broken, we are all human. We all carry pain, dreams, and untapped potential. And we all have the capacity to change someone's life simply by choosing to see them. In a world obsessed with appearances, let this story challenge you to look deeper, to notice the person sitting alone on the sidewalk, the coworker quietly battling depression, the neighbor struggling to make ends meet. Ask yourself, what would happen if I stopped, if I listened, if I believed in them when no one else did? Because here's the truth. Every act of kindness creates a ripple. Every word of encouragement plants a seed. And every moment of connection has the power to transform not just someone else's life, but your own. So, as you go about your day, remember Clara and Jonathan. Remember that redemption is possible, that second chances exist, and that beauty isn't found in perfection, but in authenticity. Most importantly, remember that you have the power to be the light someone needs, even if they don't realize it yet. If this story has inspired you to embrace empathy and take action, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together, we can continue sharing narratives that challenge perceptions, celebrate resilience, and remind us of the extraordinary impact we can have on each other's lives. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, may you find the courage to see beyond the surface and to believe in the infinite possibilities of the human spirit.